welcome to the May Healthy Watersheds Partnership meeting. We have a couple of treats today. In the past couple of meetings, it's mostly just been me talking at you, but we all get tired of that. So we're fortunate today to have some guest speakers to talk about what others in the partnership are working on and potentially how we can support their work and plug in. This meeting will be recorded simply so we can post it on the Healthy Watersheds Partnership portal after the meeting for those that are double or triple booked or just can't make it today. I will ask again if you're not speaking to mute yourself, but also feel free to utilize that chat function. And see, I think that's it. So yeah, so we're close to 40 folks in the meeting, so doing a roll call is just madness. So please introduce yourself in the chat. Again, use that to be social, ask questions. I'll be monitoring the chat during our guest speakers time. So speakers, don't feel like you need to monitor that while you're presenting. I will elevate questions for you. And then you all are here, so I have a feeling you're already on the email list, but if you're not, you can join by going to our contact page and clicking a button and it'll get you there, so you can stay in the loop on future Healthy Watershed happenings. Let's see, I don't have any major announcements from the Water Board Healthy Watershed side. Our co-chair, Ali Dunn, is still out on leave, but she should be back by our August meeting. And one awesome announcement that we do have is the Office of Information Management and Analysis, or OIMA, takes on a California Sea Grant Fellow every year. And this year we got Corey Clatterbuck as our California Sea Grant Fellow, and she will be helping us move the landscape assessment dashboard farther along over the course of her fellowship, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But you know, virtually clap and welcome Corey to the Healthy Watersheds Partnership family. And then with that, does anyone else in the partnership have any announcements or things that they would like to share? Feel free to raise your hand, use the chat function, or unmute yourself. Okay. Hearing none. Just a quick overview of what's happening today. I know we're all kind of Zoom and Teams, you know, stressed out. We've got it all day, every day. So we wanted to keep these meetings short and sweet. We'll be having 2 guest speakers today to talk about really interesting work that's happening in California. I will give a brief update on where we are with the landscape assessment dashboard and where we're going to go. And then I feel like the brainstorm after the last meeting on future agenda items potentially sparked today's presenters. And so I'd like to kind of spend some time, you know, just kind of throwing ideas around for future speakers or topics while we're all in the room. And then we'll wrap up and enjoy the rest of our day. Are there any questions, thoughts? Okay, if you haven't had a meeting with me before or joined the partnership, I take silence as enthusiastic agreement on whatever I just proposed. So I'm glad to hear the enthusiasm from y'all today, but also encourage, you know, engaging if you can. All right. So our first speaker is Joe Morgan and Rafi Mazur, and they're going to talk about the beta Streamflow duration assessment method for the Arid West. Joe and Rafi, I can stop presenting and give you control. However you want to do it, totally works for me.
Thanks, Anna. Yeah, I can present, and I'll just run the slideshow while both Rafi and I present.
Sounds great. And if you're unfamiliar with Teams, they put the share screen button right next to the leave button, which I feel like design-wise isn't super great. But anyway, we see your screen. Take it away.
All right, great. Thank you for that introduction, Anna, and thank you so much for getting us on the agenda today to talk about streamflow duration assessment and the beta streamflow duration assessment method for the Arid West ecoregion that's been developed by EPA, the Corps of Engineers, and SCWRP. Before I get started, I'll just kind of go over the structure of the presentation. So I'm going to start off just by talking about some background on streamflow duration and the streamflow duration assessment methods. Spend a little bit of time talking about uses of SDAM, SDAM, which is the acronym that we use for streamflow duration assessment method, and kind of tee up a couple of discussion topics that I think might be germane to this audience. I don't know if anybody else on this group was on the environmental flows work group meeting yesterday. This is going to be a similar presentation to that, but we have a few changes to target this audience in particular. Then I'll hand off to Rafi to talk about the development of the Arid West SDAM method. And go into the details of the method itself, including the supporting materials, online resources. We'll talk about how this fits into the broader national effort to develop SDAMs covering the United States and different ecoregions, including the Western Mountains ecoregion, which covers part of Northern California. And then we'll end with hopefully a good amount of time for input and discussion from the group. All right, so to start off, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what a streamflow duration assessment method, or SDAM, is. So SDAMs use indicators of flow. These can be physical, hydrological, or biological indicators to predict the flow duration class of a stream reach. So flow duration is can be thought of as an environmental flow attribute. It is the length of time that a particular stream reach sustains surface flow. So the amount of time where the water in the reach is present above the surface of the stream bed and flowing. And we subdivide flow duration into three classes: ephemeral, intermittent, and perennial. And I'm going to just quickly go through what the definition of those three classes are under SDAM real quickly. So up first, I've got perennial streams, and this perennial river in particular is the Whitewater River at Whitewater, California. And I have the hydrograph between 1960 and 1980 shown there. The red dot that you see around 1966 is when the river briefly did not have surface flow, but you can see the rest of the time it did have surface flow, mostly kind of low base flow with a couple of high peaks. And this would meet the definition of a perennial river, that is flowing continuously during a year of normal rainfall, not necessarily during a year of abnormally low rainfall. And the stream bed is located below the water table, so the water table is sustaining surface flow. And now I've got an intermittent river. That's the Babo Kamari River at Tombstone, Arizona, and the records from the USGS gauge there. I see a couple more red dots, and they're a little bit longer, corresponding to seasonal drawdown and drying out of the stream bed during the dry season. And this is going to be a typical intermittent river, which is flowing only for part of the year, typically seasonally, when the stream bed is either below the water table or when snowmelt is providing sustained surface flow. And then lastly, we would have an ephemeral stream. That's Dark Canyon at Carlsbad, New Mexico, with the hydrograph there. And you can see that aside from the couple of flood peaks that you see there, some with very high CFS numbers, the flow was non-existent outside of those flood peaks. So the stream is dry the rest of the time. It's flowing only in direct response to precipitation. So that gives us our three flow duration classes: ephemeral, intermittent, and perennial. And in these three flow classes and types of streams provide different ecological functions and services, and it's important to be able to distinguish between them for a number of reasons that I'll get into later. Before leaving this slide, I'll just add that so the SDAM is a rapid field-based assessment tool rather than something that is modeled or remotely sensed. It is actually based on indicator data that is collected in the field. It can be conducted in a single site visit, usually less than an hour to conduct an SDAM assessment. And it provides an advantage in being a site-specific determination and not just based on, for instance, the National Hydrography Data Set, F codes, that are not always accurate and usually just based on a single field visit. And may not reflect the status of all streams located within a watershed. So there are multiple uses for streamflow duration assessment methods. The primary reason that EPA has been investing resources into developing these to cover the entire country is because they are needed to implement the current definition of waters of the U.S. under the Clean Water Act. Under the new definition of waters of the U.S. called the Navigable Waters Protection Rule, ephemeral streams are excluded from Clean Water Act jurisdiction. Intermittent and perennial streams can be jurisdictional if they meet some other requirements. But we think that SDAMs have a whole host of other potential uses and benefits for different monitoring programs. And that's really the reason that we're doing this outreach with the Water Quality Monitoring Council and the work groups. One clear seemingly obvious benefit would be just kind of improving ecological assessment. We've got these 3 flow classes that exhibit very different functions and services to be able to assess their condition using whatever methods properly. You need to be able to distinguish what is an ephemeral stream from what is an intermittent stream and be able to assess them in an apples to apples way. Similarly, it's important for applying the appropriate water quality standards. A number of states have developed SDAMs just at a state level meant to implement water quality standards that may apply differently to intermittent or ephemeral streams. And this is important, of course, because these streams provide different beneficial uses, and we need to be able to distinguish between them to understand which stream should be providing which uses. And then lastly, it could help prioritize restoration and protection efforts for the same reason above, that understanding how flow duration affects the ecosystem function of streams is needed to appropriately plan restoration and conservation projects. So I had a couple of ideas for potential discussion topics with this group, and I think one kind of clear application for SDAM in this group would be being able to incorporate it into the healthy watershed assessments. For instance, they could these flow duration classes and SDAM assessment results could guide monitoring objectives and help target assessments for the same reasons I described before. Being able to distinguish between different flow duration classes would help appropriately target the assessments to ensure that you're either capturing a representative sample of flow duration classes across stream reach segments, or targeting assessments to those flow duration classes that are most important for the watershed goals. It could also just kind of complement and inform the choice of other assessments. For example, level 2 conditional assessments, these qualitative assessments, such as the California Rapid Assessment Method, have different modules for episodic or more regular riverine systems. Being able to select the appropriate module, again, would kind of help guide these monitoring objectives by ensuring that the right assessment method is being applied to the stream in question. And then just kind of generally think that being able to use SDAMs, particularly in sort of an ambient monitoring setting, to detect how intermittent, ephemeral, and perennial streams are distributed throughout a watershed, might help kind of feed into this overall healthy watershed partnership goal of understanding how different watershed level drivers and controls drive this particular aspect of stream condition, which is the flow duration. Also interested in other potential monitoring applications for SDAM. One that I've asked about a couple of times and am really interested in exploring is how SDAM could be applied to managing groundwater dependent ecosystems under the state's Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. This tool is really kind of tuned to detect essentially where a stream bed is relative to a water table or snowpack, but particularly in the case of intermittent streams, we think that potentially it could help identify groundwater dependent ecosystems and guide their management. And then just interested in general on any feedback that you have on the development of the SDAM and our methodology, which I will hand off to Rafi now to talk about.
Thank you. Yeah, so I'm going to provide you guys with a bit of an overview of the technical details of how we developed this method. I won't go into that much detail, so if you are interested in hearing more about it, we've got time for discussion, but also feel free to reach out to me or Joe anytime after this meeting. As Joe mentioned, the EPA is trying to develop SDAMs for the entire US. And the Arid West was really the first region where we developed our process for developing these methods. And so what we did, it serves as a template for what we're doing elsewhere. We began with what we call our preparation step, where we assembled a steering committee consisting of folks like Joe and other EPA and Army Corps staff who are likely to be using information produced by SDAM to make a number of permitting decisions and other types of management decisions. And they provided us with feedback throughout the process, vetting some of our technical products and just helping us understand how our tool could be used or misused and gave us guidance all along the way. We started out doing a literature review, first to identify what existing methods are out there, both within the region as well as other regions that have maybe similar climates. We found several, but including one for the Pacific Northwest and New Mexico, which are part of the Arid West. But none for California. And then we also, in the literature review, identified a number of other potential indicators we should explore that, clearly showed some ability to discriminate between perennial, intermittent, or ephemeral streams, either because they respond to streamflow duration or they're actually a controller driver of streamflow duration. And also during this literature review is when we began to identify the sites that we wanted to sample. We have sort of two types of sites. For most of our studies, we have what we call baseline sites, and these are sites where we don't necessarily know the true flow duration class, but we could deploy loggers and start generating what we call that baseline data. And we had what we call validation sites, where the stream flow duration was relatively well documented. These might be things like gauged sites or sites that folks have deployed temporary loggers at. What we found pretty quickly was that the most of the data people had been collecting on flow duration was primarily in perennial streams. There was a few intermittent streams where we had some data. There's a number of USGS gauges and whatnot, but almost no information on ephemeral streams. And so we had to really rely heavily on our baseline data collection, as well as other sources, like simply relying on local expertise to really fill those gaps at the for ephemeral sites. I should point out that this baseline data effort was relatively small for the Arid West compared to what we've done in other regions. It was sort of like one of our lessons learned is that we really need to do more to get these ephemeral sites as part of our method calibration. And I should point out that the gap in the Arid West is smaller than the gaps in other regions where there's almost no data on ephemeral streams whatsoever. We developed a protocol to collect data on a number of the indicators we selected, and we went out and tried to get this data at about 100 sites throughout the Arid West in different regions of the region, different states. And then we developed a method by identifying which indicators could give us metrics that had really good discrimination ability between the different flow duration classes. Interacting heavily with our steering committee, we refined and simplified that so we could end up with something that was statistically, very, very accurate, but also still easy enough to use as a sort of field-based tool. Once we completed that method, we developed a user manual, and it was associated with a whole training program, and that sort of culminated in a public notice from both the EPA and Army Corps that this method was available for a 1-year, what they call a beta period. This is where we are right now during the sort of rollout period. We're trying to help people learn about the tool, either so that they can use it or decide whether that information is helpful for their programs. During this time, we're also going to be doing some continued sampling at our baseline log sites to continue generating this data and see if we can revise or improve the tool after additional data collection. Can you go on to the next slide? So I mentioned that this method is for the Arid West. That is that sort of green blob you see at the top map. There are arid portions of the Pacific Northwest, but because there was a tool already available for that region, we kind of excluded it from our efforts. We sampled data at those sites, those 89 sites you see plotted there. We tried to get a relatively even distribution of sites across these flow duration classes. Some of these sites, like I said, some of them we knew because they were engaged sites. Some of them we knew because somebody had deployed a logger there, and others we knew their status because there was a park ranger who knew that site very well and had been observing it for years and could give us that sort of local expertise that we really needed. Ideally, we tried to have multiple sources of information in each site, but sometimes we only had one. Once we had all the data for our data set, we used a machine learning statistical method, random forest, to predict stream flow duration classes from these indicators. And like I mentioned, random forest, it's a great statistical tool. It can provide pretty good accuracy for complex relationships, but it's not something people can easily use in the field or not without some training. And so we tried to simplify the method into getting something that's a lot easier to use in the field. And that's where our final method ended up. So I mentioned that this is a beta method. The reason why is because we want to have a year beta period for people to use the method and give us feedback about what it was like for them to use it, whether it was challenging or easy, whether they find the results credible or not. So we can get this feedback from end users and also collect some additional data. Now, like I mentioned, Arid West was the first of several regions throughout the country that we've been focusing on. And because it was first, we had sort of a smaller scope of budget to pursue this one. It has about a quarter of the data that we're collecting in the Great Plains, for example. So we're actually going to try to beef up the amount of data we have for the Arid West and refine the tool after this 1-year period. Next slide. So this is actually what the method looks like. We have 5 biological indicators. I should point out we did evaluate geomorphological variables like substrate sorting or entrenchment ratios or sinuosity. We looked at hydrologic variables, things like presence of hydric soils, but none of them were ultimately selected for inclusion in the final model. And this actually makes a lot of sense because biological organisms are really great at integrating all the different factors that they experience over a long time. And this is why we like them as assessment tools and for measuring water body condition. And it's that same property that makes them so useful for stream flow duration assessment as well. The first indicator we're looking at is hydrophytic plant species. This is something that's fairly widely used in a number of other methods. These are wetland indicator plants with a status of obligate or FAC wet status. And we're seeing how many you can find in the channel or within a half channel width of the channel. And we simplify this into 3 categories. So you don't have to identify every plant on the site. It's either none, 1 or 2 species, 3 or more species. So once you found 3, you sort of know where you are on this table. The next one is you're looking for aquatic invertebrates and just counting the number of individuals you find. And it's similarly just binned into a few categories to sort of keep the amount of effort of it manageable. And it's, none, just a few, up to 19, or many, meaning 20 or more. For aquatic invertebrates, we count any aquatic life stage, whether it's alive or dead when you find it. So it can be a living, swimming aquatic insect larvae, or it can be a pupal case or a snail shell you find in a dry stream bed. They both would count. In our method, we found that invertebrate composition was actually also important, but we also recognized that this was going to be a major challenge for many practitioners who aren't trained in entomology to do these kinds of identifications, either in the field or in the lab. And so we really tried to see how much we could simplify this and without losing model performance. And we settled on looking at the presence of what we call EPT taxa. These are mayflies, stoneflies, or caddisflies, or Ephemeroptera, Plecoptera, Trichoptera. And you're simply just looking at the presence or absence of them. You're not quantifying how many, you're not quantifying which species or which families you're finding. So you're just looking at order level analysis. You have to know how to identify those orders and how to distinguish them from similar looking orders. But that's pretty much the extent of taxonomic knowledge you need to know for the bugs. The fourth indicator is algal cover on the stream bed. And we're looking basically at presence or absence, although we do have a bit more of a quantification component that I'll talk about in a bit. But again, as with insects, it doesn't matter whether the algae you're looking at is a live growth of algae or a dead mat. You just want to make sure that the mat you're looking at clearly grew there and didn't just get deposited from some upstream source. Finally, we have a class of indicators that we call single indicators. And this is something that we've seen applied in a number of other SDAMs out there in the literature. These are indicators that when you see them by themselves, you can rule out an ephemeral status, but you can't necessarily determine if the stream is intermittent or perennial. And there's two that we included in this method. One is the presence of fish other than mosquito fish, but any species, native or non-native. And the other is algal cover. So we already talked about algal cover, but this time we're looking for a heavy extent of algal cover. So over 10% of the stream bed covered with algae. There's two reasons why we would have included a single indicator. First is the impact on the performance of the index. Did it either improve or at least not degrade the performance? And the second reason is we thought it would contribute to the acceptance and defensibility of the method. And this is particularly true for fish more so than algae. People have an inherent understanding of the value of intermittent and perennial streams at supporting fish. So there's really good, including that indicator, we thought would be useful for promoting buy-in by the management community. Now, Joe mentioned earlier that we calibrated our tool to differentiate 3 different classes of streams, perennial, intermittent, and ephemeral, but we actually result in 5 different classes. And this reflects the level of certainty we have in the outcomes from the tool. So we have those 3 major classes, ephemeral, perennial, and intermittent, but we also have one we call at least intermittent. I kind of hinted at that earlier when I mentioned the single indicators, but you can get that through some other combinations of indicators. And that just means that you can't really confidently say whether it's perennial or intermittent, but you can rule out ephemeral. The 5th class is something we call need more information. And this can happen for a number of reasons. This can happen if your stream is severely disturbed, like it's below a treatment plant that doesn't have, fairly high levels of treatment, and it's eliminated EPT or even all invertebrate taxa. That does happen sometimes in the arid West, especially in our effluent dominated systems. It also might happen in certain concrete channels that are fairly, that are at least if the assessment happens shortly after they've been sort of maintained or cleaned. Typically not if there's been enough time passing. It might look like you need more information a lot when you look at the list of outcomes on this slide, but it really only happened at around like 8% of the time in our development data set. So it's not quite that common. I think the time that's probably the most interesting, or I should say, the one that creates the greatest challenge for our management concerns is this can occur when you have streams that are really on that borderline between ephemeral and intermittent, where you have some indicators of longer flow duration, like a few hydrophytic plants, but nothing else. This happens in situations where you have fairly extensive groundwater influence, but it's like, a river running under sand, where it's rarely actually expressed at the surface. So these would sort of result in need more information. That should be a flag that you should do some more investigations at that site after using this tool. It doesn't give you the final answer, but it helps you know where you need to maybe spend some more effort to figure things out. Next slide. Okay, so like I mentioned, we put out a user manual which describes the protocol for collecting data and then interpreting it. We have a number of reference images for aquatic invertebrates, and these images were almost exclusively provided by DFW's Aquatic Bioassessment Lab, so we appreciate their efforts. They have some great high-quality photos on their website, and that helps people who aren't used to looking at bugs get them started at trying to figure out what's an EPT tax and what's not. We also have a glossary of terms in this manual, as well as like a list of just resources you might need, to help you get started identifying plants, or how to get some additional supplemental information that can help you figure out those tough calls when you get those need more information classifications. The ultimate accuracy of this method, it was 81% accurate at discriminating between ephemeral and intermittent or perennial streams, which is pretty good. It's certainly, a lot better than, using a tool that hasn't been developed for this region. It's a little bit lower than the levels reported for the Pacific Northwest tool, and that's one of the reasons why we want to continue to refine this method. The overall accuracy at discriminating between perennial and intermittent streams was lower. I think it's actually that's a challenging task for any method to do. I think it's particularly challenging in the arid West, where almost all of our perennial streams are subjected to drying, at least on a long enough time span. So there's probably less opportunities for clear differentiation between the two stream types. But again, this is something we want to try to improve as we continue to develop the tool. Next slide. We have a sort of a training hub where you can access a whole lot of material to help you get started using the method. So we're hosting this on an ArcGIS hub. We have a user manual and field forms you can use. If you don't like using paper field forms, we actually have a template for a survey 123 data entry form you can use and adapt for your own purposes. It's not a place you can submit data to, but you can use it for your own data management systems. We also have a shapefile to help you figure out whether you're in the arid West region versus one of our adjacent regions, as well as we've developed an online report generator that helps take all the data you've collected and produce classification with all the supporting material in a standardized format. That can be really useful for streamlining the data, the permit application process. Like I said, we also have a number of videos, both webinar recordings, as well as some field footage going over the process of collecting data. So if you haven't collected bugs before, it can help with that. And if you have collected bugs before, you might not have collected bugs in a dry stream. So sometimes seeing the footage of how that goes about can be helpful as well. Next slide. Okay, so as we mentioned, the Arid West method has been, it's out there, and we're right now just conducting the rollout phase. The next method on the list is the Western Mountains region, which includes large portions of California, particularly the North Coast and Sierra Nevada. We are in the data analysis process for that method now, and we expect to have a beta method released this fall. The Western Mountains, it's a little bit larger of an effort than the Arid West, but still a lot smaller than the other regions. So we do expect that one to also have a beta period for people to test it out and get familiar, and we'll have some enhanced data collection there as well. All right. Kind of just covered that, so maybe just go on to the next line, which I think is maybe your discussion points, Joe. So, so maybe we can just open it up and see if people have questions about the use or development of the beta SDAM for the Arid West.
Awesome. Thanks, you guys. It looks like we have a couple of questions in the chat. One from Carol, who's interested to know if this could help identify groundwater dependent ecosystems.
Joe, do you want to answer that?
Sorry, yeah, just moving around screens a little bit. So I think maybe it can. That's one particular area where I'm interested in looking more at it. As I started at the kind of beginning of the presentation, the main thing that distinguishes intermittent from ephemeral streams in many cases, although not all, is that connection to groundwater. I think intermittent streams that rely on a connection to groundwater, in addition to perennial streams that are sustained by have base flows sustained by groundwater, could definitely be considered groundwater dependent ecosystems under Sigma, and SDAM could be a method for identifying those.
It looks like the next question is kind of similar, but goes into a bit more detail, where in particular, how can we distinguish between gaining and losing stream reaches that are common in arid environments? I'm going to say that by itself, the SDAM cannot tell a gaining or losing stream by its reach without more contextual information. However, I think it could, along with some watershed scale context and land and some geological context, you may be able to classify it along with the data you get from the SDAM. So I think that's actually a good idea, but I think by itself, without any additional context, I don't think you could distinguish between gaining and losing streams. I don't know, Joe, do you have a different take?
No, I agree. I think in general, kind of we expect that the SDAM is going to be most useful as a complement to other assessment methods or even modeling exercises. I remember reading just a couple of weeks ago that a kind of a national mapping effort to identify gaining and losing stream reaches just published a data set. I haven't looked closely at it, but I wonder if SDAM might be able to cross-reference with that and be able to further classify beyond just our 3 flow duration classes.
Yeah.
And then it looks like Carol has another question. Are there any particular types of streams for which you're looking for additional data in California?
Yes, there are. So we are
Carol
doing
Plant, Rafi. I feel like she's asking all the great questions.
I feel like she's asking the best questions. I swear, I don't know if I've no, we had no communication with her. But I like how she's thinking. So we are continuing data collection in both the arid west and the western mountains. So we really are talking about all over California. By far the biggest data gap, especially in the mountainous regions, is we have almost no ephemeral streams that either have documented flow, there's been some continuous data collection, whether it's a wildlife camera, data log, or a stream gauge. Like I said, we barely even have local expertise. People quote know that they're everywhere, but they kind of don't pay enough attention to actually sort of note where they are. So those are the streams that I think we are probably most interested in trying to get. But if you have, perennial or intermittent streams you think are worth studying, either where primarily you already sort of know a lot about its flow duration, we can use that for method calibration or development. Those would be really helpful to us. I would say if there are streams where you don't have but want stream flow duration information, that can be helpful too. At the very least, you can start seeing how SDAMs can help you make those types of determinations. I'm using lowercase d determination, not a jurisdictional determination. And giving us feedback on simply what's it like to use the tool, and do you find it credible, and do you find it easy to use or challenging? And so that could be almost any stream that matters to you. So I could say either of those. Streams that you want the information, or streams where you already have the information. And again, any part of California.
Yeah, in general, it seems like we just need more data in particular, especially from ephemeral streams. And Rafi, it sounds like for developing the Western Mountains method in particular, you wound up a little short on data on ephemeral streams just because of the predominance of snowpack influenced ephemeral streams.
Yeah, I would say our definition of ephemeral streams and our definition of mountainous ecoregions are somewhat in conflict with each other. So it was really difficult to find streams that met the definition of ephemeral. California's actually probably better off. So when there's snow-dominated regions, snowmelt can influence almost every stream. It's less so in coastal California, north coast. So if you have some, I guess we're talking about like relatively steep gullies in our more mountainous areas. But if you have a stream that you strongly suspect is ephemeral or is ephemeral, we'd probably be interested in studying that.
Great. And then it looks like Val has her hand raised. Go ahead and unmute yourself and take it away.
Hi, guys. So this might be a little premature, but I'm curious as to whether you've published or are planning on publishing a statewide beta data set. It doesn't have to be at high resolution. It could be at whatever resolution you have it at. And I see that on the slide you've got here, you're talking about, integrating it with Healthy Watersheds Partnerships data layer. So that kind of tells me that perhaps you're moving in that direction. But potentially, I'm talking next, potentially we have a use for differentiating perennial versus intermittent versus ephemeral in the stream gauging project, and mostly along the lines of, if we think an area is important but it's totally ephemeral, does it actually make sense to put a stream gauge there? Maybe that's not the right kind of data collection. And I'm just sort of curious I guess that's two questions. One is, are you going to publish a data set? And two, what are your thoughts on the data being used in that manner?
I can say that we are definitely going to make all of our data public. I'm happy to share it now. It just needs a little cleanup in metadata documentation. We are currently going to be, we're preparing a manuscript to get the method in a peer-reviewed journal, and I'll probably accompany that. If you're eager to look at it early, I can share that. I just want to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying on a statewide basis. Like, are you looking for the data we collected in developing this method? Or are you looking at for the sites where we sort of evaluated, because we looked at like 1,000 possible sites to sample. We could share that data. Or are you looking for a statewide application of the tool so that we know statewide like where our ephemeral ones? So
yeah, the latter. Yeah, we don't have time to be running models or digging into the data sets, and I'll talk more about that later. But we're on a very tight time frame, and we're dealing with huge amounts of different data. And so, we're sort of looking for something that somebody else has compiled, analyzed, and sort of spit out some kind of, here you go, statewide. This is our classification scheme, and it doesn't have to be super high resolution, like whatever you've got. But yeah, that's when I look at Healthy Watersheds Partnership results from 2013, that's kind of what I see. I see these nice compilations of whether it's by watershed or by area. That's the sort of thing that we would be able to use. Anything that requires more work is probably not going to be useful at this time. But
so I can answer this in sort of two ways. One is that I think exactly what you're looking for isn't something that's available, but it is something we are interested in developing. I know at least the SWRP is probably pursuing some opportunities to do that work on a statewide scale. It would be like a data collection plus a modeling effort to extrapolate where we think streams will come up as ephemeral or whatnot. There are a handful of other tools out there that kind of get at similar things, although not with a specific lens, not with a groundwater dominance kind of angle that this might provide. Some of our previous ephemeral stream assessment work does include the production of maps of where we think streams are ephemeral versus intermittent versus perennial with some accuracy, which I'm happy to share. It's not bad, but it's sort of like, big picture, it's great. Close up, questionable. I'm not sure if that's the resolution level you mean, but I'd be happy to share that. And I'll put a link to that report in the chat. I think it'll have a place you can sort of download the shapefiles that were produced for that.
Cool, thank you.
But yeah, I think, we're very interested in kind of the potential to develop some sort of ambient probabilistic survey using SDAM that could, provide the kind of either regional or statewide data set that you're talking about. I'll throw out here. So I work for Region 9's wetlands program. We have a biannual, that's every 2 years, not twice a year, every 2-year grant program called the Wetland Program Development Grants that are available to states, state agencies, local agencies, tribal agencies to improve their wetland program, which is actually broader than wetlands. It also includes riparian areas and coastal ecosystems. So our request for applications for that is just found out is going to go out next Tuesday, the 18th. And I encourage everyone to take a look at that. And if you're interested in kind of expanding the tool, using it in an ambient setting, definitely think that could be a good funding mechanism for developing that kind of product.
Great. And it looks like some folks are trying to get you some data in the chat. Carol and Suzanne, who's with the Yukon Tribe Environmental Program, and provided her email in there. So Carol, maybe you can send them their email, or Rafi and Joe, if you want to put your emails in the chat so people can connect with you after the fact, that would be great. And then it looks like I did, what's an online meeting without a technical glitch? I had one. Hopefully it didn't impact your experience very much, but it looks like some folks might not have access to the chat anymore. And if that's the case, feel free to just unmute yourself and chime in, or I don't know, raise your hand, whatever the other options are.
I just posted my email address in the chat. If folks want to follow up with me offline about questions about the method or any feedback, I'm definitely happy to talk about any aspect of this. Great. I see Rocky just did too.
And for those that don't have access to the chat right now, I realize that might be very frustrating for you because you may not be able to see it. So I will be sure to publish their email in the notes that we put out.
Thanks, Anna. And I will send you our slides after this if you're able to upload them to the website or send them to the listserv. Cool.
Yeah. Okay. Any remaining questions for Joe or Rafi? You started a little bit early, so you guys might be like right on time. Okay, everyone's quiet and therefore pumped about SDAM and its potential use for their work in healthy watersheds.
Thank you so much for having us. I really appreciate the opportunity to present on this product and get the feedback and additional information from you guys. So thank you so much.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both. It's great to have you. So we'll kick it over to our next awesome guest speaker, Valerie Zimmer, and she and potentially others may be talking about this stream gauge prioritization plan that she kind of alluded to in her question. And so Val, if you have slides, feel free to take over. Otherwise, I have a slide with the background information for you. So whatever you want to do.
Oh yes, I've got slides.
I thought you might.
Yeah, cool. Let me get my screen up. Nope, that's not what I wanted. That's the chat. Hang on, why is that not working?
And then Carol, while you're getting that up, Val, Carol has some technical advice for us. If you're having difficulty with the chat, you need to unmute yourself in the settings for the chat to have access, which is a weird thing we have to do, but here we are. So thanks for that advice, Carol. And then Val, go ahead and take it away.
Okay, my computer's being a little bit slow, so let's see if we can get everything. There we go. Off the screen. And I'm going to get into slideshow mode. Why is my computer being slow? Okay, I see the slideshow up, so I want to say, yeah, I'm here to give a little chat about the SB 19 stream gauging effort. SB 19, it refers to Senate Bill 19, and the Senate bill is about figuring out, in part, where we're going to be potentially putting new stream gauges. It has multiple parts, and I'll get into that. So what's the deal? The Senate, passed this bill because it believes that, or the legislature did, that, having stream gauge networks can help us manage our water resources and conserve freshwater species. And so there's a lot of areas where there are conflicts and potentially multiple benefits. The analyses show that almost 75% of watersheds in California do not have a state and federally operated stream gauge. And the majority of those watersheds do have surface water diversions. And so this seems important for a state that experiences, drought, that has water moving from one half of the state to the other, that has, important ecosystems and lots of other things. So, having a stream gauging network that can handle those different uses seems pretty important, and that's why that bill was passed. Let's see if I can get the. And my computer sometimes does this thing where it runs a lot of background garbage and doesn't want to work. So we might be having that problem today. Okay, so slide 3. This is a multi-agency effort. And so we have folks from DWR, from the water boards, from the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the California Geological Survey. And I think some of those folks are on the chat, so I want to invite them to introduce themselves if they're here. I know Todd is on the chat or is here in this meeting. Todd, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, Todd Carlin. I work with the Department of Fish and Wildlife Water Branch.
And Rob, are you here as well? Okay, not sure who else. I believe, is anyone from DWR here? I thought I saw Teresa on the line earlier.
This is Les Gray with DWR Northern Region. Work under Teresa, and yeah, we do the surface water investigation section. We operate about 70 gauges up in the Northern Region.
And Les is a relatively new addition to the team, so I've just been reminded that I need to change the slide and add Les to the slide.
And it looks like Robert is here, but he can't unmute due to a shared office, but he's here with us.
Cool, great, glad to have him. Anyone else from water boards here? Doesn't sound like it. And how about California Geological Survey? Are Mike or Bill on the line? Okay, well, I know who to put on spot now, so that's great. So yeah, we've got a bunch of folks that are working on this together. And we also have a technical advisory committee, and the technical advisory committee was put together to try and represent all the different interests in California. And so basically, it's, we're not trying to reach out to everybody in California because that would be really difficult to do, but we're trying to reach out to, somebody from all of these different areas of, water agencies, ecosystem, stream gaugers, internet folks, that kind of thing. So we have a lot of folks on our technical advisory committee who have been sort of brought along on the process, and hopefully they're reaching out to their contacts and letting them know what's going on. So real quick overview of the bill. The bill directs the Department of Water Resources and the State Water Board to develop a plan, and this is important, we're developing a plan. This is the thing that we're mainly doing, to deploy a network of stream gauges that includes a determination of funding needs and opportunities for modernizing and reactivating existing gauges and deploying new gauges across California. It does not, importantly, include funding to install or operate gauges. It does not expand the authority of the State Water Board or DWR to require installation or modification of a gauge. The bill also asks us to consult with DFW, Department of Conservation, Central Valley Flood Protection Board, and other interested stakeholders. So really what I want to take away from this is that this is sort of going to be a plan that's written at a high level that will hopefully support future, future gauging efforts and gauging priorities in the state of California. So it's going to be kind of high level. Here's another important point. Right now, we're sort of selecting our GIS layers and data sets, so we're sort of sifting through lots and lots of data. We're developing a methodology for gauge gap and prioritization. We're looking at new technologies, and we're looking at funding. And here's the really important deadline that we have for ourselves. We're supposed to have a draft report by the end of July. So that's really tight. I've been on this project since, I want to say, mid-January. So I've only been here, 4.5 months right now, and this is our deadline. The final report is not due until the end of June 2022. So there are going to be lots of rounds of review and edits to this, but we're on a pretty tight schedule, and so that tight schedule is driving a lot of the decisions in how we handle data and what we do. For example, I don't have time to run models. So here's another thing about our project activities. The primary activity that we're doing, again, is writing a plan. And in that plan, we're going to be developing a list of priority watersheds based on criteria that are in the bill. So we are going to have some kind of list of here's where we should go with our gauges. The secondary objectives is that we hope to put together a data visualization tool. I think this is something that Healthy Watersheds Partnership is working on as well, potentially with streaming inputs if we have data sets we've chosen and they're hosted somewhere else. We kind of don't want to be hosting them internally. If somebody else is managing that data set and it can just sort of be brought into our visualization tool, that's great. We hope to have some kind of prioritization tool where that outlives the project, right? I mean, we can generate a list of watersheds, but it never will update if it's in a report. But if it's a tool that is being updated in real time based on, we've got a new gauge there, or potentially like somebody has some funding and that funding meets a particular objective, where maybe would they be interested in putting in a gauge if they have a primary objective? We need to be able to identify the priorities. In other words, where should we put a gauge in the future based on specific criteria? But we also need to be able to give credit for proposed locations. And so what that means is if somebody goes and says, I want money to put a gauge in at this location for this purpose, the funder might ask them, well, what else is the gauge good for? Is it only good for one purpose, or does it also benefit somebody else? And so those secondary benefits in and of themselves might not be a priority, but it's nice to know that a particular gauge can have multiple benefits, if that makes any sense. And so that's the difference between a prioritization and sort of a giving credit. And so this would be something that would be, hopefully in a tool that we would develop that would help people answer that question. And again, I'm not making any promises because I'm not sure how much time and resources we're going to have to do this. So how might we benefit from the Healthy Watersheds Partnership? So I will say, first of all, I'm really happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. I like to give presentations. I like to talk to people. I like to pick people's brains. And I've already, kind of talked to Anna a little bit about some of your activities. There is an outreach component, but the truth is we're sifting through a lot of information, and we might be missing certain data sets that are super important that could be very useful for us. And so the more I talk to people about this project, the more feedback I get, or we get, on data sets, on how we might use those data, and how we might move forward and what their priorities are. And so, I like being here, and I don't think many of you have heard me speak before. And if you have, you might notice that the presentation is different every time I give it, because it's kind of where we are today. So one of the questions we want to know is, can we use some of the data layers? Is there a direct use of some of the indices that the Healthy Watersheds Partnership have generated in some kind of prioritization scheme? And the answer is maybe. We might be able to use some of that stuff. Another question, benefit for us are these connections, collaboration, outreach with Healthy Watershed Partner members. Some of you might have been on a list where we were thinking to ourselves, hey, we really need to reach out to these folks, and we just haven't gotten around to it. So this is a good way to reach out. Maybe some advice on water quality prioritization. That's something that we're struggling with a little bit right now, what to do about water quality priorities. a little bit of advice on reference gauge prioritization, like where are areas that are important for referencing, whether that's hydrology or something else, and then maybe some of the data visualization and tools expertise, because I know that's something that a lot of you are involved with, is building data visualization and tools. So basically, I'm saying general advice and feedback is welcome. If you have a question, I will say, Anna, it's okay to ask during the middle of the presentation. You know, if you want to raise your hand, we can discuss that in the presentation, or if you have something to say. So we sort of outlined this, how are we going to go about the project at a high level initially. And it roughly falls into 4 steps, at least the part that I'm mostly involved with. And one is the gauge gap analysis, which very simply is, where are there gauges and where are there not gauges? So where are we missing gauges? The second part of it are prioritization criteria, and criteria are just kind of what's important for management and what are the data sets that support that sort of management objective. It doesn't say anything about how we rank those criteria. It just asks what's important. The third part of it is, how do we rank that? Like basically, how do we take those 2 pieces of information, the management objectives and the data sets, and where gauges are lacking, and how do we decide where we target, what do we target for new gauges? The fourth part, which is this big gray box, has a lot of stuff in it, because a lot of this stuff sort of maybe bleeds into the first 3 or doesn't. But some of the things that the bill asks us to look at are reactivating old gauges. So if there was an old gauge with a long record that got deactivated for potentially funding reasons, maybe that's a site we should reactivate, because those long records are valuable. Another question the bill asks us to look at are upgrading existing gauges. So, you know, there are some gauges out there that are pretty high quality, that have been there a while, but maybe they don't have a flow rating curve, or maybe they're not collecting temperature data, or that kind of thing. And so are there sites that we should potentially be upgrading? The third thing is co-locating with other monitoring activities. So if there are sites that are commonly used for water quality monitoring or bioassessment or something else, but they don't have a flow gauge, that might be a good place to put in a flow gauge. That knowledge of flow might be important for interpreting those data. Then there are questions about local partnerships, access and suitability, and specific site selection. So this big gray box might just end up in a recommendations, sort of in the bill text. It might be treated differently for a tool, but in terms of the high level plan, you know, it's hard to say where we're going to go with the implementation strategy. It might just be some recommendations. So I kind of put it off to the side because I'm not sure that we have time to deal with it. The first thing, and I'm going to very briefly talk about the gauge gap. The gauge gap really is a gauge inventory and what stream segment or watershed area does each gauge represent. So it's based on hydrology. And we're sort of only including gold standard gauges. That's gold standard being high quality, permanent, year-round, well-rated, known gauges with online data, maybe. So those are the gauges that we want to be considered gauges that we have in the state. There are, of course, a lot of gray area gauges. These are locally operated gauges that might meet the gold standard, but we don't really know. You know, if they're in CDEC, if they're in CDEC and they have a rating curve, we'd be including those kinds of gauges. But unless we have some knowledge, easy to access knowledge that these are gold standard gauges, we're not going to include them in the gauge gap. And that's primarily because, you know, we don't want to exclude watersheds from consideration for a new gauge just because somebody's got a temporary seasonal gauge in that location. You know, that's great that they're monitoring, but we don't want to, you know, we don't want that to be a negative. First, everything else that comes through, we're going to be excluding that from the gauge gap analysis. We are doing a little bit of inventory, so folks are telling us about their gauges. We are not, however, doing a comprehensive inventory of all the gauges in the state of California. We don't have the time for that. We might use those gauges, though, as kind of a validation. If somebody tells us, hey, this is a watershed of interest and we've got gauges and here's the locations of the gauges and this is what we're using them for, and then we run a prioritization scheme, we hope that our prioritization scheme would highlight the same uses in the same areas as people on the ground are telling us is important. So it would be used in a validation scheme. But the gauge gap analysis really is based on physical hydrology, how far upstream and downstream does each gauge represent? And it's really just based on watershed percent change. Very simple. We did consider other metrics, flow percent, statistical correlations, regional characteristics, that kind of thing. But that sort of very quickly balloons into a big data science project, and it gets complicated. You have to collect a lot of data to make those correlations, those statistical correlations. And so we don't really have the time or the data sets to do that. Maybe someday somebody will do that. But if you can think about it sort of at a base level, you can imagine that a gauge in a desert that's super flashy might not cover a very big area. It might only cover that one little stream that it's on, because the thunderstorm hits in that small area, opposed to a gauge in, say, Massachusetts, where usually if it's raining in one place, it's raining everywhere. It's relatively, so that gauge could potentially be representative of a much larger area. Okay, so the two things I really want to talk about are the prioritization and the prioritization ranking. And so the bill text asks us to consider water management and conservation of freshwater species. So that's actually in the bill. The prioritization criteria are the data to be input into that ranking. So those are your management objectives. The prioritization ranking asks us to consider the beneficial use criteria, areas where there are multiple beneficial uses, areas where there are conflicts in water management, and reference gauges. So this is actually all in the bill. This is not something that I generated. What are the beneficial use criteria? Well, they are ecosystem, water supply, water quality, and flood management. So those big four are discussed in the bill as being priorities. There are other things the bill talks about: monetizing, reactivating, deploying new gauges, cost sharing agreements, integration in a data network, AB 1755, historic data record, who's funding the gauge. But there's other criteria that are actually maybe fit into our prioritization scheme, and they include temperature, cannabis, and groundwater management. And so groundwater management can sort of go underneath water supply. Cannabis, the same thing. It's part of water supply. Temperature is a water quality issue. And so there are other criteria, but the big four are the ecosystem, water supply, water quality, and flood management. Of course, we start looking at data sets, and this is by no means a comprehensive list of the types of data. It's just kind of an example. And we kind of put them in this visualization of what category does it fit underneath. You can see very quickly that some of these data sets could be under more than one category. So there's a lot of overlapping of the data sets. And so we have to sort of think about them separately, but also think about how they fit into the big picture, and where they might be used. So just kind of throwing that out there, it is very hard to sort of silo everything. That's okay. So how are we selecting our data sets, our criteria? Well, first of all, we really like pre-existing compilations and indices. So if somebody else who's an expert put a lot of time and energy and thought into collecting the data and thinking about whether or not it was good data or bad data, and making some kind of ranking or index, that's really valuable data, because I'm not an expert in all of these areas. And so, with that, Healthy Watersheds Partnership is a good example of that. The presentation we heard earlier is another good example of that. These guys, people spend a lot of time thinking about this. We prefer data sets that are vetted by multiple agencies or organizations. What we don't want is for someone to be, we don't want to have to be defending the integrity of our analyses. We would rather say, well, there's a publication and this agency and these groups stand behind it, and it got published, and that's why we're using it. That's a little easier. We would like data sets that are transparent, open, and available. In some cases, we may select individual data sets for specialized criteria. Like if there's something very special about something, we might consider an individual data set rather than an index or a compilation. And then the last thing, the lowest priority probably are specific locations. In other words, monitoring, but areas that we are considering include monitoring sites, reference sites, areas where there are surface water diversions, that sort of thing. Those are specific locations. So So we looked at some of the Healthy Watersheds partnership data, and we haven't really gotten very far along this, but these are some of the areas that I think potentially we could use either in our rankings, or at least as a check on some of the stuff that we're doing. One of the areas is potentially the impairment, like how impaired is the watershed. We're not going to put a reference gauge in an impaired watershed. It's that simple. Water quality, you have a water quality index. That's really nice. You have some ecosystem indices, although I think we've got different data sets for that, so we might not be using that. And then we have some climate and future impacts. And I'm not entirely sure how we're going to be looking at climate, but I really like the climate change vulnerability index. I think that's a nice compilation. It potentially could be used in our prioritization scheme when it comes to things like conflict and water management, where are conflicts likely to increase in the future. That's important to know. Just a quick overview of what we are going to be. We are currently, and this is preliminary, everything I'm saying here today is preliminary, but what are we going to be using for ecosystem management? We've selected 3 primary data sets. We've looked at other data sets, and we decided that these 3 represent the other data. There's overlap between different data sets or different indices. And so we've selected these 3 as being relatively representative. One is the ACE Aquatic Biodiversity Rank. This is a CDFW ranking that looks at biodiversity for endemic species, rare species, threatened and endangered species. They look at fish, they look at reptiles, amphibians, invertebrates. I believe those are the 4 that are in this. There isn't really much on birds or plants or mammals, and that's in part because maybe there aren't enough data to support a ranking. And it also, I believe there's also something going on with birds that is separate to this. There's also the Nature Conservancy's California Freshwater Blueprint. This was a slightly different effort where they were kind of looking at contiguous sort of areas that should be protected, and they made a point to select. I think that's the difference in the green and the purple. They were looking at areas that are already protected. So basically, they're saying we should maybe focus our resources on some of the better areas in some cases, because we have a better chance of success. That's part of it. They're looking at also some of these, what are the species? What's the biodiversity? Also goes into this. But they selected about 1/3 of the state. And so this is kind of be used in kind of a yes or no. If it's in the TNC California Freshwater Blueprint, it's got an extra point because it's an area that they have identified through their analyses as being potentially valuable. And then the last data set we're looking at are the natural communities commonly associated with groundwater. This is another TNC data set. They're calling it indicators of groundwater dependent ecosystems because these data haven't been verified. These are the yellow and the red are riparian or GDE type vegetation types, and also wetlands that have been identified. And so these are little polygons. Most likely we're going to sort of pin them to different stream segments, and then if those stream segments are passing through a groundwater dependent ecosystem, again they would get an extra point. So that's how right now we envision using those kinds of data sets. Water quality is something that we're kind of struggling with, honestly. We have identified some data sets. One is the 303D list of impaired waters. That's a data set. We've got some stream temperature predictions. This is important for fish and fish species, especially salmon. We've got your Healthy Watersheds Partnership Water Quality Index, which is really nice. You have these really nice different indicators of what's important for ecosystem and watersheds, and so we've looked at these. We also have the Community Water Center tool, which talks about TCEs and nitrates and arsenic. And this tool was primarily built to support SGMA groundwater planning, and we are asked to look at groundwater. There are some questions about whether or not this data set is relevant, because a lot of these are urban pollution problems, concentrated in urban areas where maybe there's already gauges. It's not clear to me how a stream gauge would benefit some of these areas. And so we're not totally sure how to use this data set, but we do have it. But yeah, here's some of the direct use challenges that we have with water quality, and this is where it gets complicated. I look at this great water quality index. This is your data set. Low and high water quality, pretty clear. But it's not at all clear to me where a gauge would go. Where's the best place for a gauge based on this? Do we put it in the most impaired areas or the most pristine? And so this is a big challenge, is that this is a beautiful data set, but it's completely unclear what we do with it, if that makes any sense. And this is true for a lot of our water quality data sets, is that it's unclear how we should use those data in a water quality prioritization scheme. Other data sets, so we have talked to, and we haven't spent a huge amount of time on this because we are, again, stretched pretty thin, but there are lots of data and lots of models, but we do not have the time, nor do we have the expertise. I am not a water quality expert by a long shot. So we don't have the time or expertise to sift through those data or run a model. We kind of need an existing statewide spatial compilation to use. So some of the data sets that kind of fit in that category where we're struggling with what to do with it are, the pesticide, the storms, swamp monitoring results. Bioassessment sites might be the one exception to that. There is the California Water Indicators. I don't know what the P stands for. Maybe it's portal. There's a bunch of data sets there. I think a lot of that also feeds into it's the same data that is in the Healthy Watershed Partnership data sets. There's blue-green algae. A lot of that is kind of just spot checks, I think. If somebody reports, I saw some blue-green algae. So we're not totally sure what to do with these data sets. The other problem is, what are the highest quality or best reference sites that could benefit from a stream gauge? So, if there's a water quality monitoring site that if somebody goes to regularly and has a long period of record, that to me, that's a clear place that could benefit from a stream gauge. It is, however, often unclear as to what those particular locations are. So again, bioassessment sites. So this is a category of what we're looking at using. And I think basically we could use your advice on this. If some of you here have some thoughts on how we might use water quality data sets, or you have something to share with us, like, oh, here's our list of where we go to monitor. Like, here you go. Like, that's helpful. Some of the ideas we have, for example, these data in CWIP appear to be, and I've looked at them in a very short amount of time, they're kind of measurements and a score. Potentially, we could prioritize sites with the highest number of measurements, quite simply. Like if there are sites that have 57 measurements versus one that's somebody only visited once, the total number of measurements could be used to be a priority, right? And of course, we would be deleting flow gauge sites because some of these are co-located with existing flow gauges. And so, once you start munging the data to count the number of measurements and then you delete everything that's already out of flow gauge, you probably come up with a much smaller list. Do we prioritize certain scores? I don't know. The other question is, are arsenic, nitrate, mercury, TC, and perchlorate, are they all priorities? Temperature we know is, right? But again, this gets back to the urban water question. Are we interested in urban pollution, or is that something that is kind of outside the scope of a stream gauging plan? And also, do we analyze each of these separately, or do we summarize them? Do we look at sites that have lots and lots of measurements of all types, or do we create a list for all of these? And if there's overlap, great. But if somebody is really interested in nitrates and there's nothing else being measured there, then potentially nitrates would stand on its own. So those are some ideas. This is sort of the brainstorming part of the project. Again, I'm open to ideas and expertise that might be here on this call. Here's some of the CSCI and bioassessment sites. Todd, do you want to quickly explain what's on this site and how we might use it? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, like Val said, with some of the other data sets, it's trying to figure out, how we might go about using it. So the figure on the left there are some reference condition bioassessment sites that we got from the folks at SWIRP. And yeah, it's that question of when it comes to stream gauging, is it helpful to co-locate flow gauges with those sites, having flow gauges upstream? So kind of thinking about how we might, or where we might install gauges to inform some of those bioassessment efforts. Excuse me. And then the one on the right is another product from SWRP, and it's basically a HUC 12 level subwatershed assessment looking at median predicted CSCI scores based on land use gradients and some human modifications. So, as you could see, the Central Valley is predicted to have pretty low CSCI scores. And yeah, this is another one, should we be looking, we're looking at hydrologic reference condition sites, from the unimpaired standpoint, no dams and stuff like that. But when it comes to bioassessment sites and looking at a figure like this, thinking about where we might want to put gauges, like Val said before, is it in those, in this figure, the unconstrained sites, the higher, the HUC 12 subwatersheds that have those, higher predicted median CSCI scores, or would we be looking at some of those areas that have the lower predicted CSCI scores? So I think this kind of gets at the goal and kind of some of the things that Val was talking about before. Do we want to put them in these low water quality areas or some of the other ones? So that's something we're hoping to get feedback on, and start maybe some dialogue with folks from this group. Like Val said, not a lot of us in the group have extensive water quality experience, so we'd like to solicit that information from you all.
Yeah, thank you. And I believe this also is in one of the HWP layers, the CSCI score. So we've got that data. We're trying to figure out what to do with it.
It looks like Terry's got his hand raised, Val.
Okay, Terry.
Right. So I think that this data set that you have here is more accurate than the HWP data set, because that was done in 2012 based on data that was older than 2012. Mm-hmm. And if you're asking my 2 cents, I would sort of focus on these areas where we have reference sites, because we really want to be able to predict what's happening with climate change and document it as the rivers run drier and what's happening to the biological community. Seems like that's a good match.
Okay, thank you.
And maybe Rafi can help, or I don't know if Pete Odie is on this, identify those, because not all of those black dots on the reference site are sampled every year, but I know that a subset is.
Yeah, I think we do about 30 samples per year. There's a few sites that get hit every year, and then the rest sort of rotate through a set of about 500. This year is a little different due to travel restrictions, but I think that's what we're going to go back to next year. So this year they're mostly a day's drive from Sacramento.
And can you provide that to them, Rafi? The list of the 30?
Yeah, I'll ask. I'll get that list of sites. Yeah.
That would be amazing. Thank you. That's super helpful. Yeah, those would be, especially if they don't already have a flow gauge nearby.
And then before you get going again, it looks like Jeanette from TNC did a gauge gap study a few years ago and provided a link to that, and thought it might be a good starting point for y'all to look at if you haven't already. Thank you, Jeanette. And the answer is yes. Actually, we have extensively looked at the TNC's gauge gap analysis, and I can talk about this if we have time. I took it out of this talk because I wanted to focus on the management objectives over the gauge gap, but we are looking at using the sort of a combination of the TNC gauge gap, and then UC Berkeley, Ted Grantham's group kind of took the same methodology but put it into some R code, where they can adjust, we can flexibly adjust some of the parameters if we'd like, and potentially also, and I'll get into that, potentially also add some prioritization ranking. So it's basically the same method as TNC with a little bit of recoding that UC Berkeley did in some upgrades, and we're going to see how that goes. Any other questions? Comments? Okay. So some of these other areas, questions, some of the other thoughts is, how do we use 303D listed areas? Again, it's the same question. What do we do with this information? Are water quality control plan beneficial use categories relevant? The water boards has got a layer
that I haven't quite figured out how to make sense of it, but it has to do with their TMDLs. And these are water quality control plans. And there might just be too much. There might be too many water quality control plans, or it might be too hard to figure out what ranks above what. So it may not be relevant. Are sigma basins inherently a priority? We were asked to look at groundwater. Are sigma basins inherently a priority? I'm not sure. Seems like there's a lot of focus on those areas already. You know, and again, how should water transfers be considered? A lot of those are groundwater. Do we want to think about, you know, does stream gauging in some way benefit the water transfer question? And see, these are questions where I don't have a good answer for them, but if somebody has a good answer for them, you know, again, please feel free to raise your hand. And more. There's lots of these kinds of questions. There are other criteria data sets besides the big four. You know, we're looking at drinking water in disadvantaged communities. Again, the Community Water Center has identified areas that have disadvantaged communities. And so this could be something that could be added to our scheme at the end. There's the climate variability. Sorry, I meant to say climate vulnerability. And this is really nice because again, this is a HWP layer where there was some analysis done on areas that are probably going to increase in conflict in the future, and perhaps we should be planning for that, and stream gauging could be a part of that. And then the third question is, you know, tribal lands, like what are priorities for the tribes? This is a really hard question to answer because there are so many tribes, and you know, their priorities may overlap substantially with some of the other priorities, but we don't have a good way of assessing that, and this has been a tricky thing in our agencies because there's some limited outreach with tribes, but it seems to be a little bit spotty. Like, you know, we don't want to leave tribes out, and so I don't have a good answer for that either. It's like, how do we consider tribal lands and what's important, cultural resources, you know, ecological resources, that sort of thing.
It looks like Terry's got his hand raised, and then I have something to chime in after you, Terry. So go ahead.
Okay, yeah, let's talk.
So once again, this map is a compilation of data that was provided, I believe, by CAL FIRE. But you can find the actual sources, and I'm not sure the way we smushed all of these together really makes sense. And so you might want to go to the original source of these climate variability data and figure out, you know, what's the best set of them to use for your purposes.
Okay.
And I actually, I think we had the individual layers in the back of the Healthy Watershed. But again, this is like circa 2012 data, so I'm sure it's been updated since then.
And then on the tribal data front, Val, I would recommend reaching out to the Office of Public Participation's Tribal Affairs Unit. There's, you know, they are kind of coordinating all of the tribal things for the water boards. And then there's tribal coordinators for each region that you might be able to connect to figure out, you know, through their engagement efforts that may or may not be recent, what priorities have come up from their conversations or consultation with tribes. I think there might be more information out there, potentially not in a data set format, but you know, I'll provide the tribal affairs link in the chat, and that can get you started.
Yeah, I believe another member of our team is working on that. It's not me.
Right.
And I don't believe they're getting a lot of useful feedback. And I'm not sure why they're not getting useful feedback. And you know, I don't know if it's they have other priorities or what, but yeah, so far we haven't gotten much to work with, honestly. So there has been an effort to reach out through official channels, if you will.
Yeah.
You know, but yeah, I'm open to ideas beyond that. If there's other data sets or knowledge that folks have.
Yeah, there's a working group meeting for the tribal coordinators next week, and if you send me some like talking points, I just happen to be the chair of that meeting, so we're in luck here. But if you send me some talking points, I potentially could bring that up.
Okay.
For things to consider while they're all on the call. things like that.
Okay, yeah, sure. I would love to. Yeah, I'll definitely send you an email about that. That's useful.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, I'll stop interrupting now.
No, I asked for interrupting. I love the interrupting. I think it's great.
Well, then it looks like Corey has a question. She's been interested in finding updated data for the 2013 assessment, which, as Terry has mentioned a couple times, the data used in that 2013 is published in 2013, but the data was, from I think 2010. And she's having difficulty isolating specific data sets that were used for that vulnerability piece.
Okay.
So it might be, maybe you guys can meld minds later. And then Corey, feel free to unmute yourself and add any other questions, thoughts.
Yeah, I just, I'm trying to, like Anna said, maybe recreate some of the pieces of that assessment. And so I'm trying to find the old data sets and see what new data sets are out there. And I know like a lot of the new data sets have already been curated by this group, which is awesome. But finding some of the older data sets and finding exactly which data were used has been a challenge. So I would be happy to talk with anyone here who was involved in creating particularly the climate variability piece, but probably a couple of others as well.
Thank
And
you.
I do.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, and I was just going to say, I think we've identified, at least in this figure on the right here for variability, I think those first 4 products are from CalAdapt. So looking at the precipitation and temperature departures, I think we've come about that in our research, but those projected changes in snowpack and whatnot, we haven't found those. But like Terrence said, I think we'll have to go back into the source documents and try and find that. But I think those first 4 are CalAdapt products.
The other sort of somewhat related to this effort that's going on is the CGS folks are building a sort of a fire / debris flow / flood layer, and I haven't seen it yet. It's still under review. This is California Geological Survey, because debris flows are, they're landslides that happen after, say, a fire devastates a watershed, and then the soil doesn't stick to the hills, and big rain and everything comes down the watershed. And there were some, there were events in Southern California, I think 3 years ago, where some people got buried. Counties are very concerned about fire and debris flow hazards. How stream gauging can help that, I'm not entirely sure, but I know that CGS is working on some kind of layer, and I'm encouraging them to publish that layer when they finish it. And so hopefully a layer that's being developed for our purposes can be shared. And I don't know for certain what the status of that is, but I'll let you all know when that comes out, if they can share it. Any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna move on. How are we doing for time? Again, and then this is sort of getting into like, how do we, once we have these data sets, how do we rank them? So this is quote unquote easy. Okay, this is pretty easy. We have a rank. That's nice. We can do some decision support modeling. We can throw in data sets that have clear priorities and clear spatial distribution. Pretty easy, right? We can work with that. However, even easy prioritization can be tricky. For example, data sets with locations, in other words, wetlands, the groundwater dependent ecosystems layer. What do we do with that? Do we pin them to stream segments? Like the stream segment passes through, yes, no? Or do we rank by the total area in a HUC 12, or do we do something else? And so there are some decisions that still need to be made with even easy layers. How do we normalize these layers? Is it the area of the groundwater dependent ecosystem divided by the area of the watershed it's in? I'm not sure. What do we do with watersheds partially outside of California? That's a little bit of a tricky thing. I think we have to just be aware of it. Oops, sorry. And then relative weighting between priorities. Even applying equal weighting is a decision which may not result in equitable results, right? So like, even if we say ecosystem we give 1 point for ecosystem and 1 point for flood and 1 point for water supply and 1 point for water quality, what if 3 of those often overlap and one of them doesn't ever overlap? Do we completely lose that one that never overlaps, and we then have no priorities for that? And so I think this is probably a graphic a lot of you have seen. It may not be perfect, but equal weighting, equality is not the same as equity. And so we have to sort of keep that in mind. Like, even equal weighting, that is a decision. And even we are trying to avoid making decisions that can be, challenged. But I don't think I don't think it's possible to actually do that. So we have to sort of think about these things as we go through this process. So that's the easy prioritization. Here's an example of something that's tricky. This is a layer that we may use called the Soil Agricultural Groundwater Banking Index. And we hope to use it to look at where flood managed aquifer recharge projects might be occurring. So groundwater in the Central Valley has been a big deal for water supply. And these folks, I think at UC Davis, went through and looked at what is the potential for a groundwater dependent ecosystem. And I don't want to get into the actual details, but they had a bunch of data sets that went into this, and they developed their ranking about which basins, which areas would be good for these kind of projects and which weren't, based on the soil type or whatnot. And so this adds additional questions, like spatial question. Well, what if the best place for the gauge is upstream of the data layer? I'm not going to stick a gauge in the middle of where potentially, you would want to flood. That doesn't make any sense. If you're going to be doing this kind of project, you need it somewhere upstream, right? Where the water's coming from. And are all stream segments upstream equally valuable or not? I mean, you start to think about something like this, teeny tiny streams upstream aren't really going to be that useful for a floodmar project. You kind of want something a little bit bigger, probably. Temporal question. Should we consider current land use or crop suitability for this process? So there are crop layers, there are land use layers. DWR is publishing one right now, a brand new, beautiful layer. However, by the time somebody actually gets around to getting funding to, say, install a gauge to support floodmar, it could be 5 years from now, it could be 10 years from now. And so do we throw in a land use layer from this year? I don't think so. I think maybe what we do instead is we say, when you go to get your funding or choose your site, you need to look at the most recent version of this layer instead of us saying, here's where the good crops are. Here's crops that can be flooded and here's crops that can't be flooded, because that could change. So there's a temporal question. And then of course there's a legal question as well. Like, should we include fully appropriated streams? Most of that southern half of that map are stream segments where there is literally no water available to appropriate. All of the water is either designated for ecological purposes, or it's designated to go into some kind of reservoir or diversion scheme. So, we could just delete half of this layer right out of the gate because there's no water. But should we? I mean, we don't know what sort of law changes might happen. We don't know what kind of water transfers might get thought up to support these kinds of projects. And so do we actually include that or not include that? And so these are sort of tricky questions. And when you actually start to think about things like flood hazard, the debris flow question, when you talk about water supply, water quality, they all kind of have these spatial and temporal questions. I mean, if you're dealing with flood management, if my house is vulnerable to a flood, I don't really want to gauge in front of my house. I kind of want it upstream, maybe even upstream of the reservoir that's protecting my house. And so there are these questions that sort of come out. Now, we can zoom out. If we're zooming in at the stream segment level, these questions are harder. If we zoom out to say the HUC 10 level, some of those spatial questions get a little bit easier. We can just say, well, somewhere in this HUC 10 or somewhere in this HUC 12, a stream gauge would be helpful for this thing. That makes it a little easier because we are writing this very high level plan. But if we're going to be building a tool in the future, we do actually have to address that. So there is some wiggle room because of our low resolution spatial component to sort of get around some of these questions, at least for the purposes of writing a plan. Again, we have other questions too. Perennial versus intermittent versus ephemeral. Do we ignore ephemeral streams? So, hey, can we use SDAM? This is where my question came back. There's the NHC plus V2, VAAs. I think there is some sort of perennial versus intermittent flag in there, but what's the threshold? Let me just show you something really quick here. This is actually a bigger question. I'm going to drag this over, and this is like hot off the press. This is just completely me playing around with some numbers yesterday, so don't take this for what it's worth. But I've got this kind of spreadsheet. I don't know if you can read it. And, you know, I kind of went through and I was trying to figure out, like, based on reference gauges, you know, what are watersheds, trying to be spatially, and I'll get into this later. What are watersheds that don't have any gauges for reference, that are reference quality? In other words, what HUC sixes and what stream types could use a reference gauge? And you can see the very simplest sorting of these data sets. And I do have a threshold for size, so I've eliminated streams, you know, areas that are just so small they're not relevant because they're just such a minor amount of space. But so there is a threshold below which I've deleted. But when you start looking at areas that don't have reference gauges, no surprise, a lot of these areas are flashy, ephemeral, rain-driven systems. So can we even put a reference gauge there? Like, should there be some sort of threshold? No, or yes or no? Is there a good spot for a stream gauge? So that's why this kind of comes up is, you know, when you start looking at a reference gauge or potentially other prioritizations, it doesn't make sense to be recommending, I don't think, a stream gauge in an area that's either dry or in flood. I don't think that's useful. It may be useful to monitor that stream in some other way, but a stream gauge, I don't think that's in scope. So there's a question there. I'm going to just kind of put this back on. You know, another question is the stream order. You know, teeny tiny streams way out, you know, aren't probably priorities for you know, way high in the watershed. They may not be priorities for certain uses. You can sort of see flood management being one. Maybe they are for ecosystem, but again, if we sort of zoom out to the HUC 12 level, maybe that's not such a big deal. And then again, multi benefits may be a function of resolution. In other words, there may be multiple needs in a given HUC 12. So you're like, oh, this HUC 12, it's got ecosystem, it's got a sigma basin, you know, maybe there's some water quality TDML stuff in the same area, but actually when you zoom in, the place you would put a gauge to benefit the ecosystem is in the mountains, and the place you would put a gauge for the water quality in the sigma basin is down in the flats, and they don't overlap. Like, they're completely different parts of the watershed. So that's something that, again, at the high level, zooming out, it may not be a big deal. That watershed's gonna appear to have 3 needs, and so it's gonna rank pretty high. But when you actually zoom in to go install a gauge, you're gonna run into, there's nowhere to put a gauge that would do all 3 of those things. So that's an issue too. This is getting back to sort of Jeanette's question about how are we going to do our gauge gap. Right now, we're probably looking at using the UC Berkeley Stream Network Analysis. There's a G, SNAG they call it, and the reason we're using that instead of the TNC gauge gap is it's kind of, it's an R code that we can sort of customize, and we can not only do a gauge gap analysis, but we can also start to add some of these prioritization things. And I don't know if this is the right tool or if it's going to work for all of our priorities, but we're trying it out. It's very similar to the Nature Conservancy's gauge gap too. It's based on location in the watershed area. In this particular example, the well gauges any stream segment with a gauge plus stream segments upstream and downstream with 80% and 120% of the initial watershed area. So as you move up upstream and downstream, the watershed area changes. But this 80% and 120%, it's completely adjustable. I think that TNC used 50% and 150%, and that's based on, it's in the USGS literature. It's kind of a standard first step for where gauges cover is that 50%, 150%. But again, if you think about it, it's probably more regional, site specific, and so that's just a ballpark guess. What we like about this tool is it may be integral with prioritization. I think it's definitely integral with giving credit. Like if we have area, and by what I mean by giving credit is you want to put a gauge in an area and somebody asks you, well, what else is it good for? Well, this tool is going to answer that pretty easily, like you can see. It may be able to do some help with our data visualization. We may be able to visualize this in real time. And on the right, we have this graphic of network efficiency. And so what that means is very quickly you can look at which sites are meeting multiple beneficial uses. And this is at the stream segment level. And so that's great. We can very quickly identify places at a very high level of resolution that benefit multiple objectives. And so in terms of mushing everything together and seeing what falls out, I think this tool does a good job. We may still have to look at things separately so that we don't lose out on particular criteria if they don't tend to overlap with other criteria, and so we'll have to be a little careful because again, that's something that could come out. So this is probably, and I can talk more about this gauge gap stuff if you guys are interested, but I took it out of this talk for now. Reference gauges, however, I do want to quickly address reference gauges. There's kind of two, as far as I can think of, two definitions. There's the hydrology reference gauge, and so that sort of is flow that is relatively unfettered, or there's very little impairment in terms of whether it's land use or diversion or roads or impervious surfaces. Like these gauges are in high quality watersheds, and so if you put a gauge in, you get a pretty good estimate of what would be coming down naturally, and that can be used for all kinds of things, including flow prediction, or different, looking at what sort of what is the effect of an impairment, say in a model. And so the bill very particularly does call out reference gauges, and I think about 25% of the U.S. gauges, maybe I'm incorrect with this, were considered to be reference quality based on their analysis. And so what we want to do for reference gauges is we want to evaluate the spatial distribution of the existing reference gauges, and we want to potentially prioritize inactive reference quality gauges for reactivation. Of course, this is assuming that they were inactivated for a reason like funding, and not inactivated for a reason like it's a bad site. And so we sort of have to make some judgment there. But I think there are alternative definitions of reference gauges. And one of them is the water quality question, right? Where are the bioassessment sites? What are the sites that somebody uses as a reference year after year after year after year to monitor how things are changing? And so that alternative definition is something that we are trying to sort of integrate with potentially the water quality question. And there may be other definitions that I'm not thinking of. On the right, you see a graphic. It's showing in black the USGS gauges reference basins, and the little dots are reference quality gauges, and they're sorted by stream type. And so when I showed you that very quick spreadsheet, this is what I was talking about, is the stream types, is that we not only want reference gauges that are spatially distributed throughout the state, a fairness question in each HUC, and I just kind of chose HUC 6 as a first cut, just thought maybe that would be a manageable data set size. So we want a geographic sort of element to it, but we also sort of want a stream type element to it. A groundwater driven reference gauge that's next to a high volume snowmelt and rain gauge, they may not have a lot in common. And so a reference gauge in one may not really do any help for assessing hydrology in another. And so we sort of want to spatially distribute it based on geography and also stream type. At least this is the idea. Now, the second part of that, so this is the space, sorry, I've got a little ahead of myself. So this is the spatial component. This is a UC Davis part of the California environmental flows, and you can see all the different stream types in California. And so we want to have a spatial component. And I meant to have a better graphic than this. I just kind of clipped this off of their website, but in the report, we'll have a better graphic that shows the distribution. But you can see that not all stream types occur in all parts of the state. This makes sense, right? There are coastal streams and there are desert streams, and they're pretty different. For HUC 6, there are 96 HUC classes, and I think 47% are more than 10% of respective stream segment length in the HUC 6. I've actually changed this 47 because I realized that some HUC 6s have a lot more stream segment length than others, to the tune of 5 times as much. I think the Upper Sacramento has 5 times as much stream segment length as I think maybe it might be the Mojave, which has it very little. And so it's not just area, it's also how much stream segment. So there was a little bit of an area adjustment, sort of a threshold cutoff. You don't want to be prioritizing a HUC class that has no gauges because maybe it's just a teeny tiny, little teeny stream. And so it's not really that important. Or
I hate
class.
this to you, Val, because this is really interesting, but if you could wrap up in the next couple minutes,
Yep.
so we can just respect everyone's time. But
Okay.
also, if you could share your slides, the recording and the slides can be shared with the group, and hopefully folks can reach out to you after the fact as well.
Okay, great. So really quickly, once you identify those locations and you identify areas that have no gauges, you have to ask, based on watershed condition, is there a suitable location? And here's an example of an HWP layer. These are impaired versus unimpaired. This may not be the layer we use. We have other data sets, But once you identify, we should put a gauge here, and we don't, we don't want to use ephemeral streams. We have to look at impairment level. Another effort, I'm just going to kind of throw this, is we're working with the Internet of Water. We're trying to work on a data visualization scheme. To be honest with you, we haven't made a lot of progress on this because we've been busy with all these data sifting, but just hopefully we're going to have something out there that's transparent that people can look at, and we can maybe integrate some of our tools with that. So that's where we're kind of hoping to go. And again, this is sort of the thought, we've already kind of talked about this, like what do we prioritize? Our ephemeral streams are in the scope, is that a different effort? So there's sort of these sort of questions that we've sort of gone through. And that's the end of my talk. I just wanted to say thank you for listening. And we have there are other topics that I can discuss with you, including the gauge gap, other management areas, other parts of the bill or the report if you have questions, but maybe poke me offline.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Val.
All right.
Yeah, that was great. And it looks like there's some comments or questions in the chat for you as well.
Would you like me to answer them now or just respond in the chat?
Yeah, sure. Well, one comment is it seems like control would be difficult to maintain as well. I think this is from a couple minutes ago, and someone has to be diligent about keeping it clear to get good data. And then Rafi is asking if it's a priority to get gauges in streams that are currently to remain so, similarly streams that are likely to be very hydrologically responsive to climate change.
Sorry, I need to look at the chat to digest that a little bit.
Yeah.
I forgot a word there. I currently reference, but are unlikely to remain reference, like undergoing plan development. Sorry.
Yeah. I figured you were missing something there, Rafi, but I can't read your mind yet.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure how we consider reference in terms of climate. I mean, the climate at that point in time, it still will be a reference because it will be only responsive to climate, and it will still be, reference gauges can be used to predict flows in other watersheds and used to calibrate models. And so climate's part of those models. And so if that gauge is impacted by climate, so is everything else in the area. So I would say it may not have much of an effect on that.
I'm just wondering if there's like highly responsive versus really resistant ones. Like if you can classify them that way. I don't know exactly what models we have that can do that, but I don't know. Yeah.
So maybe another component to think about. Yeah. And I think the question about the control. Okay, go ahead.
Valerie, this is Dan. I think for that responsiveness, that could be something where we look at more of a groundwater dependent perennial stream versus more of a rainfall dependent perennial stream, because one will behave more flashy and one during climate change and drier conditions will likely provide more base flow through that time period.
Awesome. Okay. Yeah, thanks so much for that presentation, Val. Lots for us to digest and potentially collaborate with you, send you information down the road. We've got about 5 minutes left, so I'm just gonna kind of take us home here. Again, keeping things short and sweet. So I mentioned at the start, at the opening of the meeting, that Corey Clatterbuck is our awesome California Sea Grant Fellow who's going to be working on some Healthy Watershed partnership stuff. So welcome, Corey. And since our last meeting, I've met with a couple of different teams working on similar work, and we're just kind of trying to feel things out and figure out how we can plug into the different efforts and kind of support each other and collaborate. So those things are kind of in the works, and hopefully we'll have more concrete projects and collaborations by the next meeting. And then one of the things that Corey is helping us with is really looking closely at the 2013 assessment and the data sets and figuring out, what exactly can we replicate? Again, those data were from 2010. Some might not have been updated. Some of them have more data. We gotta, figure all that stuff out. And, figuring out, what's feasible just to start. And then, we've had at the other partnership meetings, lots of conversation about, you know, kind of building off of the 2013 assessment and going beyond what was used then. So that's still a plan, and we will, you know, just kind of make our way towards that vision. And then the other thing too is, as Corey is doing these things, we've mentioned, I think during the last meeting, potentially establishing a technical advisory committee. Some folks have reached out to me about that. So if you're interested in kind of getting really in the weeds on some of these concepts, specific data sets, you know, thinking about things like the different, how do we make things scale the right way so that we can make robust estimations, things like that, please reach out to me. And between now and August, I'll try and kind of put a group together for this technical advisory committee. And we can kind of get started with thinking about these difficult decisions and building a thing that we've been promising you since 2019. Any questions at this point? It's a brief update. We'll plan to have a more thorough update with more details and progress during the next meeting in August. Okay. And then, you know, I want to respect everyone's time. We said we were going to end at 11:30, and I want to keep to that. But I did find that at the last meeting, when we spent some time thinking about, you know, future meeting ideas and topics and speakers, was really beneficial. So if something comes to mind, please don't hesitate to reach out to me directly, and, you know, let me know if you're interested in speaking, or you know, you want to hear about a certain topic. Some things that we talked about involved you know, a racial equity component, and I added an actually really great presentation from someone else in OEMA that talked about a pollution and prejudice tool that exists. So there are different things that we can do in the future, and we just want to make sure that these meetings continue to be useful to you and worth your time. So if you have ideas, please share. And then with that, with 1 minute to spare, the next meeting will be August 10th. I will be, you know, posting this recording, as well as writing up very brief notes, because I think a lot of the discussion was great and not capturable in text, but including, you know, folks, the presenter slides and things like that. So that hopefully all of that will be up in the next week. And we'll send out an email through the email list once that's up and ready to review and share. And then, as always, if you can think of, you know, data sets or research gaps, there's different forms on the website that you can fill out so that we can think about those and kind of publish them so that we can work as a partnership to hopefully answer them. And then again, future agenda items, there's my email address. And with that, I will end there, unless anyone has final thoughts before we end the call. Great. Again, thank you so much to our speakers today. It was really great having guest speakers and learning about the other efforts that are happening in California. And until August, y'all have a great day and stay well. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Anna.